That's cool. Thank you. Well, first I want to thank Dr. Ivory for inviting me to come here. I really appreciate his effort to get people loosely organized, because it's easy to become parochial in your interests, and that's for several reasons. Either you just you need to focus on what you're doing, or institutional constraints. And I know it's not easy to do cross-disciplinary work. And I do appreciate what he's doing, and I can see how we've had some informal talks up until today, and I can see that what he's doing would be of interest to my students as well in education. Again, our focal points are a little bit different, but I think it's great we're coming towards. Well, actually, I want to correct it. I think our focal points are overlapping. It's just how we look at this as different lenses or frameworks by which we investigate. In fact, I'm going to talk about games, but I'll open it up to, I talk about commercial off-the-shelf games, which are things like Spore, which Spore is a game that I'm using in the middle school classroom, science classroom. We're doing one this semester as a pilot, basically to work out the kinks. I mean, this is a tremendous effort on the teacher's side. But on our side, in terms of logistics as well, and also I think I can say this in public. We're sort of on a short leash to see what can games do in the classroom, what positive influences does it have, because certainly the teachers and the students are seeing how much effort is being put into getting this thing set up. They're very enthusiastic about the potential, but there's certainly a lot of work and logistics having to take place. From how do we get the game titles? Fortunately, Electronic Arts was kind enough to donate some PC versions, but we certainly had to buy. I'll talk about in a minute. We're also using the iPod version for students so that we can have a one-to-one computing initiative. And there's actually, this is what you might call a happy accident, in terms that we couldn't afford to buy, obviously, to buy off-the-shelf titles. I'm going to turn this down. We couldn't afford to buy the $50 titles for each student. We could certainly afford to buy this lighter version, which is about $7 a pop from iTunes. And fortunately, the iPods are already in place for another project, so we're able to leverage that. So, I think one-to-one computing has some issues, but in this case, it's quite useful, where the teacher has the PT version, and she's going to use it in very creative ways. I'm going to go ahead and apologize a bit that I don't have. Today, I'm not going to have a tremendous amount of data from the classroom, because we've had to have some delays. But I can certainly talk about what we've done up until today, and I would certainly, if those interested, keep you up to date on what's going on in the classroom, because we'll have a lot of intense work over the next 3 weeks, and we have to spread over 3 weeks because they have a spring break in between there. So we're doing next week, taking a break, and then coming back the following week of April. So I'm a professor in education. Instructional design and technology is our program. I'm very much interested in, as you can see, mobile technologies and wireless technologies, from the iPod. Looking at very, very small form factor devices. So the iPod Touch is a really wonderful device for my purposes. It's not going to serve everyone's purposes, but for what we're doing, it's a great device. And moving up to small form factor, what are called netbooks. And really, that's the range of portable devices I'm looking at. I also look at phones. I've done some work with that. So I'm trying to look at highly mobile, small form factor, but let's say broad sort of features available to it. So again, the iPod Touch is sufficient for the types of activities that we have. Primarily, is sort of interacting with instructional or entertainment multimedia, and also for communication purposes as well. And then as far as the education part, I'm interested in collaborative forms of learning. So the things that we do try to encourage either peer-to-peer collaboration, or maybe novice to expert types of collaboration. So I'm going to stop there so we can have time. Like I said, I can talk forever. So I want to have opportunity to go around for some introductions, because I do want to keep this, if you have questions, just go ahead and jump in and have at it. So Dr. Ivory, I'll let you decide how to do that. Okay, again, as I mentioned, gender and technology is a very ripe area of investigation here. The other thing is sort of, which very much comes from your field, communication or film and media studies, is sort of the reproduction or representation of gender, race, maybe acceptable behaviors. You know, I have a buddy up at Madison, Wisconsin, who really, I think, again, his dissertation was on civilization. It was called Replaying History. And he is probably another one of the sort of the immersion scholars. His name is Kurt Squire, and he's done a lot of work in this area. And so, you know, we're looking at, like I said, so looking at different kind of reproducing certain stereotypes, the gender issues. And last night in class, we actually talked about Resident Evil 5, which is a mature title. It's what's called a first-person shooter game. And there was quite a bit of controversy when the trailer was released because the zombies were African Americans, and the images that was
just African.
What? Or
just African. They were African.
I'm sorry, they were
set in Africa.
Thank you, Marshall, for correcting me there. Is that, you know, so sort of the images that were being conveyed were highly criticized. And what's interesting for me is that the trailer was released over a year and a half ago, and the title was just released March 13th, I believe. And so it sort of renewed itself. But we were talking about this in class last night about the reproduction of stereotypes and this you know, sort of the biases both that are legitimate in terms of how people feel about violence in games, but also maybe misperceptions of it, because a title like that will sort of catch the media's attention, and then everyone will say, well, you know, I'm not going to allow games into my son's or my student's classroom because they have this baggage that comes along with them. So, you know, what I try to do is, I'm certainly, I guess I would be considered an advocate or someone who's drunk the Kool-Aid in this area, but I want to be cautious, and I appreciate, you know what, tell me your name one more time. Lori. I appreciate someone like Lori either wanting to come to listen to someone today or actually taking my class, because I want to have someone there who hasn't drunk the Kool-Aid or is not immersed in this to give a very critical or skeptical eye to all this. Because really that's, I do want to share a little bit about the case of working in the middle school, and that really is when you go out beyond the walls of the classroom here or the room here, you know, people have very naive or ill-informed understanding of what games are and what they potentially can do. So there's a tremendous amount of work still to be done out there. And again, I want to be an advocate, but we still remain skeptical and be challenged by colleagues or by, like I said, teachers and parents about whether this is really a good thing to have in our classes or in our homes. And again, I just want to share what I'm doing in my class. You mentioned Second Life. There's a recently released text called Coming of Age in Second Life, which is an ethnography of one person, a professor at University of California, Irvine, who spent time in Second Life and basically did an ethnographic treatment of his experience. And because there are students, my students who are interested in Second Life as a platform, I did want them to get a deeper understanding of what Second Life is, because we are using it in the class, but that's a very myopic view. This is perhaps it's one person's interpretation, but it might be a little bit broader interpretation of that. And also, I'd like to just the fact, I do think that, you know, I tend to do research that is perhaps more qualitative and field-based and immersive, and that, you know, I want to explore the games that I'm trying to promote. I want to be there in the field when the students and teachers are using them. So I do find it's a little bit of a challenge, I must say, but I do find an ethnographic treatment really helps me to get a better understanding of how these technologies are adopted and used. So I'm going to go into some more formal mode for a little bit, maybe, but I don't want to get too carried away. I will pause and let there be questions, or if something pops up, please. I have changed the title of the presentation slightly because, number one is, I wanted to open it up. I mean, I am focusing on middle school science. In some ways, it's just serendipitous I happen to end up here, because I'm not a content person. I consider myself to be more of a process person. If you give me content, I'll try to process it through instructional strategies and instructional technologies. But to be honest, I don't care what that content is, because I want to work with an expert in that area. So In this case, we just happened to fall into a middle school science classroom because to be honest with you, it was a path of least resistance, so we were able to get into this classroom. But I do see